various reports and various articles in the US or in Europe, they always talk about underreporting of cases. So it is not that underreporting only happens in India. The one experience that I will share, which probably will throw more light on this figure, is I was a student in the US. I studied in a small town called Greenville, which is in North Carolina. It's the state in the southern part of America. And I was in a university called East Carolina University. The university had a lot of residence halls or hostels, like we call in India, where people, students lived. And there were various rooms where students lived. They are typically multi-story buildings. And unlike India, where there would be a physical guard, all these residence halls are only entry with your key. And so, if you get an entrance into the hall, if you start staying, if you're a resident, you get a key and you can open the automatic door and get in. Now, during my stay in the US, there was a rape of a girl in one of the residence halls. And I was staying with an American roommate, and of course, I was terrified. I was like, my God, the crime here is very high. And she was totally indifferent to it. I wonder what would happen in a university in India if such a case happens. There would be furore. Namaste, everyone. And thank you so much, Sangam Talks, for having me once again to speak to your audience at your channel. Today's topic is something that I am very passionate about because I've been a traveler for the past several years researching my book. And today's experience is actually going to talk about how I view travel across India, which has been all positive, pleasant, and full of great experiences, and contrast it with the media reports, which has only vilified travel in India, especially for women, in the recent times. I will go straight into my experiences. I'll give you a little footprint of my travel across India. I have been researching my book, The Indic Ocean, which came out last year. For 5 years. So pretty much between 2014 to 2019, I was traveling across India on weekends because I have a day job. So that was the time I used to take early morning flights or trains and go across the country, sometimes outside of the major tourist districts. So big cities and tourist places were not really where I was looking for these entrepreneurs who I thought were working with the Indic heritage. Either it was textiles or food products, indigenous food products. And so I have had extensive travel experience across the country, which gives me a somewhat idea of how it is to travel as a solo woman across the country. I have had a travel experience outside India. I studied abroad, and so that was a part of my experiences in Western countries. Both in Australia and the US. But as a student, I also traveled in places in Europe, and I have being a very perceptive traveler, trying to go beyond the normal tourist areas, tourist created attractions for tourists, and try to interact with local people. So whether it was living with a local family in Korea or meeting local people in various other countries in Europe, staying in a small village in France, I have had experiences which give me another view of how it is to travel as a solo woman in Western countries as well. So with that, let me first get into my experiences in India. I have traveled. I'll take up a few towns, and these are, as you can see on the screen, towns which are small. So Bareilly is a medium-sized town, yes, but Maheshwar, Kesargarh, which is a small village in Gujarat, Virudhachalam, which is again a very small town in Tamil Nadu, and Haju, which is a very small little village in Assam. I've been to all these places for research, and I'll share a few experiences with you. And that will perhaps give you a sense of how I'm looking at traveling as being a solo woman in India. So moving ahead, my experience in Bareilly. So Bareilly is a town in the north of India. It's been an important junction in the days of the British, but today it is mostly a medium-sized town. And why I was there? So I took this evening train from Delhi to go and visit a yoga teacher who I had contacted beforehand in through Facebook. So it was I was researching about yoga and how young people and teachers are picking up this profession across small towns and various cities in India. And I thought that Bareilly was the right mix for me to investigate. So I took this train alone from New Delhi and the station. And what I like to also share here is that my co-passenger who I met on the train was a solo woman again, and she was traveling to meet her sister who was not well in Bareilly. And so we chatted all through, and there was not even a single moment where we felt unsafe or insecure. It was evening time when I reached Bareilly. It was already sunset, and I took an auto to the center. There's a picture there on the screen to meet this gentleman who I'd never met before. And the class was just finishing. They were doing the closing mantras in the session. And after they finished, the yoga teacher invited me to speak to them and ask questions. After they all left, I sat with him in this hall and spoke with him about his journey, about being a yoga teacher and engaging in a profession which is such an ancient profession in this country and is being reclaimed in a big way. And it was almost 9 when he and I finished talking, and I showed him the location of my hotel, which I had booked on my phone. I put on the GPS, and he graciously dropped me on a scooter. I checked into the hotel, and there was no eyebrows raised for a single woman in a town like Bareilly. It was a small hotel. It was not a five-star hotel. It was a small hotel. But the receptionist, a male, did not ask me any questions. I entered the room. I checked all the doors as I usually do when I'm traveling alone. And I had room service in my room, watched TV, and called my family. And that's it. I mean, I got up the next morning and took the train back. It's a experience of a person, of an individual. And I think this experience is something that we do not really hear a lot about. But it is definitely something that is uh, relevant and holds true for a lot of women traveling alone across India. So I'll go ahead and talk about another experience and then try and wrap it up together. This is a road trip, and this is to Maheshwar. Maheshwar is some 120, 150 kilometers from Indore. And I arranged for a taxi through a known person, a vehicle actually with somebody I knew, and went to meet a weaver. Again, somebody who I had met on the internet because I was researching third, fourth generation weavers from Maheshwar. And I wanted somebody who sold their product on a particular a market website called GoQuop, which is what I was researching. And so I met him, and he took me around the town. I met him at the ghats, of Maheshwar. In fact, my background today, as you can see, is Maheshwar. And he met me there. I was traveling alone. You can see in the picture, I almost look like a tourist there because usually Maheshwar is full of pilgrims. So, you have women in saris and coming there to take bath. And I was not there for that purpose. I was very oriented towards my research. But he met me, and you can see the picture. He's standing behind that gentleman who is weaving in that picture. And they are third, fourth generation weavers. He took me around his yarn dyeing unit. He showed me his production unit, the factory, so called, where they do the weaving. He also took me to his home at the end. And I met his family. He served me tea. I met his mother, an elderly lady. Again, no questions asked about why I was alone, what was I doing, all very professional. And so I was overwhelmed with the hospitality and the courtesy they showed because they were so keen to ensure that I was comfortable. In fact, a little incident which brings a smile to my face is that my footwear, my chappal broke while I was on going around with him, and he took me to the market and ensured that I got another one. So that kind of care and interest in the well-being of another person is something that I've not encountered in the West. Throughout my travels in India, there are kinships formed, there are relationships people form. And when somebody says that in India we regard all women as aunties or sisters and somehow use that as a negative way to denote a woman's status, I really feel very angered. And that's because I think that's the best way in which you can form connections, by giving that person a place in your heart as a person of your family. And so I think it's very important that we understand that it is not a derogatory word to be called behenji or mosi or auntie or didi, because this is something that is done out of love and affection. And I see that even in this case, the way they treated me was just like a family member. I was, no, I absolutely felt no fear encountering, meeting, going to homes of these unknown people. And that is what is the beauty of this country. Going ahead, another great experience of visiting this farm. This is a village called Kesargarh. I was researching this particular wheat, which I write about in my book, called Bhalia, which is an indigenous wheat grown in this region for centuries. And the person here, whose name was Chandu Patel, I took a flight to Ahmedabad to meet the farmer. And there was the entrepreneur who works with these farmers arranged for a person as an interpreter, and picked him up from his office, and we drove all the way 3 hours to reach the village from Ahmedabad. And he again showed me his field. That's his home there with the tractor standing in front of. And they took me to his house. His wife met me. His kids and grandkids were playing, and they offered me lassi. Again, a small village you would consider conservative. They had absolutely no qualms in having talking to me and sharing their world with me. So, and another interesting thing is that during these travels, like when I was taking the flight to Ahmedabad, I met another girl, and she was traveling to join office. She was an IT professional, join a new office in Ahmedabad, and she was traveling all by herself, alone. And I think we sometimes don't think of that as travel. Of course it is, and there are a lot of women doing this on a daily basis. Somehow it's not considered fashionable enough unless you do something really reckless. And that is again something I'll come to in the next part of my talk today. Again, one experience with Vrithachalam, these Chola temples, these beautiful temples. Again, some 3 and 4 hours away from Chennai. I traveled by a car and met the priest at this temple, and he showed me. The murtis. Actually, I was researching these Chola murtis, which have been smuggled out of India and have ended up in museums abroad, and how this particular group of people were trying to get them repatriated to India. And so, in my endeavor to actually go and see the real temple and the murtis, I spoke to that group of people who are engaged in this work, and they actually told me Vrithachalam is very out of the way and you'll be traveling alone. And I said, no, I have to do this. And so I took a late evening flight to Chennai, and then in the morning went to Vrithachalam. Throughout my travel across these small districts, I went to one or two more smaller temples in that area. Never faced any hostility or felt threatened in any way. Lastly, my last example here before I go into my perceptions and views about how this whole news reports and media reports are putting such a negative view on a wonderful country like ours. We have a temple in Hajo, which is some kilometers away from Guwahati in Assam, where this gentleman is taking care of the turtles in the lake, which is in the temple premises. And as our culture says, those animals, creatures which stay in that vicinity of the temple are not supposed to be killed. And because of that, a couple of years ago, a species of turtle which is finished, extinct in the wild, was found in this lake. So that's my picture there, going up to the temple. Apart from the usual hustle, bustle of the temple with the priests, trying to engage you in various rituals, I faced absolutely no issue. There was, all by myself, offered prayers and talked to the person, the caretaker of this lake, about the turtles. He showed me his little nursery of turtle chicks, turtle eggs, and how the hatchlings, and that is how it was. Now, coming to the crux of this talk today, is India really dangerous for women travelers? Now, of course, my experience says no, but let us try and discover the truth behind the reports of women conditions in India. Also, I would like to touch upon some of these high gender equality countries and how there is a sanctioned objectification of women which is never discussed. And you would, even as a lay travel across Europe, you would find some of these things that happen in those countries really appalling to our sensibilities. Then we have an increasing number of solo travelers in India, and that gives a totally different picture, right? Because if there are so many women traveling alone today, where is the danger, right? So there is something mismatching between the reports and the reality. I would first go on to the news reports. And there were these two specific reports which made a lot of news, one in 2018 and one in 2019. The 2018 report was a Thomson Reuters report, which placed India at the top of the most dangerous country for women. I went and digged deeper into this report, and guess what I found? That this was based on a survey of 550 experts on women's issues. I do not know who those experts are, but I can definitely say that I don't think they're travelers. Because if they were, they would not have come out with something that put India over Afghanistan and Syria as far as danger is concerned. I do not see women traveling alone in Afghanistan or Syria. It's very rare. And like I said, my experiences of travel where I've been meeting so many people just gives a totally different picture. The second one here is of 2019 in the Forbes, which made a lot of news. And this was because they again put India as one of the 10 most dangerous places for women travelers. Now, guess what? Who has made this put this report together? It's basically a survey again, and this guy, a husband and wife traveler duo, actually ranked 50 countries based on certain Gallup surveys, etc. And that is something which I think is a very faulty way of assessing a whole country and and the experiences a lot of people are having about traveling in that country. So it does not come out of any specific data, but just opinions of people. And I wonder sometimes, why would somebody do that? And we know the answers. A lot of us are very motivated with the cause of Indian heritage and ensuring that more people understand the history, the legacy that Indians have as a civilization. And that is why it bothers us. But I really wonder, why would somebody really go ahead and put out inaccurate data that vilifies an entire country, an entire civilization? So this is some data, and I wanted to point this out because I've lived in the US. And this is out of the National Commission for Women 2020. And there is data on the screen for USA in 2019, which is from the US FBI Criminal Justice Information Services. And the URLs of the links are given below, and you can go and check it. This is data we have, which is clearly saying that India is much fewer in terms of incidents, complaints reported for crime against women. And the incidents here have all kinds of categories, including not giving maternity benefit, stalking. There is also incidents of discrimination at workplace, etc. And the US number is specifically about sexual assault against women. And you can see the numbers are hugely different. Now, we talk a lot about underreporting. And I understand that there could be. But underreporting is also an issue in the US. And if you look at various reports and various articles in the US or in Europe, they always talk about underreporting of cases. So it is not that underreporting only happens in India. The one experience that I will share, which probably will throw more light on this figure, is I was a student in the US. I studied in a small town called Greenville, which is in North Carolina. It's a state in the southern part of America. And I was in a university called East Carolina University. The university had a lot of residence halls or hostels, like we call in India, where people, students lived. And there were various rooms where students lived. They are typically multi-story buildings. And unlike India, where there would be a physical guard, all these residence halls are only entry with your key. And so, if you get an entrance into the hall, if you start staying, if you're a resident, you get a key and you can open the automatic door and get in. Now, during my stay in the US, there was a rape of a girl in one of the residence halls. And I was staying with an American roommate. And of course, I was terrified. I was like, my God, the crime here is very high. And she was totally indifferent to it. I wonder what would happen in a university in India if such a case happens. There would be furore. And why I'm highlighting this is because I want to bring out the difference in the culture and the mindset of people. Something like this is regarded as a very ordinary occurrence and a very ordinary crime in America. My roommate actually laughed when I told her that I was worried about the security of women in that university. She was like, oh, come on, this happens every year. Can you imagine? I cannot even imagine this in India. Here, there are a lot of hostels where they restrict the entry of women or students, and say you cannot be late after 9. You cannot enter the residence. And there's a whole lot of angle about patriarchy when that comes up. And a lot of people say, oh, that's so incorrect. How can you not allow women to be out at night? But the problem here is that if such an incident happened in India, would the parents not blame the university? Would there not be cases against the university? Would not they be totally, tried out by the media? The dean, the professors, the principal? Of course, yes, because we place a very high importance on safety of women. And that's not the case in America. I don't think anybody really cared about that poor girl with whom this happened. It was soon forgotten and life went back to normal. So I just want to give that sense to these numbers. So what I'm trying to say is that while India may be underreported, but the fact is that I have not seen the scale of violence against women in all my student life in India. And I've studied in various colleges in India. I've had friends who've studied in hostels in small towns in India, from Punjab to West Bengal to Karnataka. You name it. All of you girls who are there in this, you would know women who studied in colleges and lived in hostels. How many times have you heard of such an incident? I don't think so. So just to give a perspective on how these numbers kind of look correct to me. There is a huge amount of crime in America and a lot of us Western countries. And India, by that comparison, is not anywhere in that, fortunately, we're not in that kind of level of crime against women. And so the question comes, why is it that then all these reports come to damage this beautiful culture that we have for women in India. And so the next thing which I want to talk about it, and this is a little sensitive issue, and there are a lot of conflicting opinions, but I would still like to take this on. And this is about the commodification of women in gender equal countries. And what I mean is the easy access to women, be it through striptease clubs or legalized prostitution. There is a very easy access that men have to women in exchange for money. And in my travel in Europe, I was shocked to see in highly gender equal countries like the countries in North, Finland, Sweden, which are regarded as this, great place for women. You encounter hundreds of strip clubs in the main streets of that city, in the big cities, in the small cities, in the small towns. And I wonder how is it that that makes that country gender equal? Because to me, mostly all these women who work there are abused. And why I'm saying and what I'm saying is not just my opinion. The European Parliament, and I've given the link below, has come out with a paper talking about how poor and immigrant women are exploited in most of these bars or clubs. It's mostly women working there out of some forced reason. So while a lot of people might say, okay, it's a choice, but the fact remains the choice is driven by what? It is by money. And when that comes into play, are we saying that women are objectified to this extent that such violence against women is sanctioned and sanctified by the country? And why is it that that is not considered as being unsafe or dangerous? Because they are women too, right? They may not be just tourists, but they are women who are immigrants and poor, who are being trafficked and exploited. So in my view, a country which sanctions objectification of women is not gender equal. Going ahead, I will talk about the next thing, which is I feel a kind of a contrast that we have in the media with a lot of reports trying to push solo travel in India. So this has become like a buzzword for young girls. And my first solo travel actually happened when it was way before any of this social media was there. But I still wanted to, travel for reasons of research, work, study, etc. And today I see that a lot of marketing happens around solo travel for women. And then you have these reports which talk about women being a very dangerous place. And even being more dangerous for women travelers than Saudi Arabia. I do not see a single post in Saudi Arabia news promoting solo woman travel. So I don't know where that, reference point is. I don't see anybody in Afghanistan talking about women solo traveling for Afghan women across Afghanistan. I don't see newspapers, I don't see social media there doing it. Here we have every day a number of posts, a number of articles, a number of just promotion and marketing around women traveling alone. And if it is so dangerous and is more dangerous than some of these countries that we've talked about, how is it that there are people promoting it to such an extent? So, to my mind, there's a big contradiction here. And that itself should bring people to think about that the inaccuracy of such statements. I'm not in any way trying to dismiss issues of women. I'm not trying to say that there are no cases. In fact, the National Commission of Women does capture all kinds of incidents against women. But what I'm trying to say is it is nowhere near the levels that is propagated or talked about in alarmist ways in media. So that is what I'm trying to put that perspective in. Now, going forward, what I want to talk about is the fact that traveling alone for women is not a new phenomenon. And I would like to talk about this because it has somehow been pushed as this big aspect of empowerment. There were women traveling for reasons of necessity for generations in India. And I can, I have some family members' pictures over here. That's my grandmother, my mother's mother, who in the 40s traveled all by herself because she needed to get from one place to another across India in a train, and because her family was also based in Myanmar, Burma of those times, she would take a flight to from Kolkata to Rangoon, which is Yangon now. Then I have my aunt here. She has been a working woman in Mumbai for since the 70s, and she has been making these trips back to her home in Uttar Pradesh by train. And she's always had, had to travel alone for requirements, and that was pretty much the way a lot of women of previous generations traveled out of reasons of necessity. And then I have my mother-in-law here as well. And she was a businesswoman in Jaipur, and she would take a bus to Delhi for procuring raw materials for her business on a monthly basis, all alone, going to Chandni Chowk, meeting wholesalers, making those purchases, doing those business deals. And you can see they're all very, unassuming women. You can consider traditional, but is really solo traveling for women path breaking as it's being pushed by the media? And so I would come back to, the whole aspect of how the Indian civic system and the society is so accepting of women traveling alone. Because, as I said in my experiences, not just from a people perspective where people are accommodating and they go out and give you that, help you out and ensure that you are comfortable. There are a huge number of ladies coaches in sleeper classes in today, which is the lowest class. So it's not like it's for very privileged women. There have been ladies coaches. My aunt, on a conversation yesterday, told me that she used to travel in the ladies coach in the 70s across the country in a train. Then we have our metro suburban trains where a whole compartment is reserved for women. We have women taxis. We have women taxis in Bangalore. We have local buses where seats are reserved for women. And there are recently safety protocols in hotels for women travelers. So there's a huge amount of support given to women travelers. And now, we can say that these are all women traveling because they have to for work. But of course, even holidaying, which is kind of a recent phenomena that's picked up, is also new for men. So what I would like to say is that even men today have started traveling alone, which was not the case before. So the whole holidaying alone phenomena is a very new thing, and there could be some reckless behavior by both genders there, which has resulted in some unfortunate cases of injury or crime, etc. But I think what has also happened is that this has been maybe made too much towards one gender, because the risks exist for both men and women solo travelers. And I talked to some of the men I know who have traveled alone for a holiday, and they told me very interestingly that there is a lot of stereotyping that men face when they travel alone. So a lot of men who travel alone are regarded as, either antisocial elements or drug addicts or, very suspiciously, which is not the case with women anymore. So I think that stereotyping exists for something that is new and people are not aware of it, because it's something that's a recent phenomenon. It's been pushed a lot by marketeers. We know that for the hotel industry, for the travel industry, the higher the number of travelers, the more revenue that they get. And so smart marketeers have been playing on this whole thing about solo travel for a long time now. And recently it's been, because of the pandemic, it's not been so much. But for the past couple of years, we see that this phenomena has really picked up. And of course, it gives a feeling of empowerment, something, discovering yourself. It's coming of age for a lot of people to go and experience a city all by yourself. but there is an element of risk that exists for both men and women. And I think that is in every part of the world. We have seen a lot of crime against women in developed countries when it comes to traveling. A lot of mugging incidents against men in Western countries where people are, there's crime, street crime. I have traveled in New York and I find that I felt across all my travels to be the most unsafe in New York traveling by myself. So I think these kind of crimes and scams exist all over the world in varying degrees. And as a traveler, I think it makes you have to make a judicious decision and take that thing into consideration about how much you're willing to risk in order to gain a particular experience. So with that, I would like to end this talk on a thoughtful note, which is kind of an advice based on my travel experience to all people traveling alone, either for work or either for a holiday. The first one I'm saying, don't be reckless. And what I mean is that there is today, and that kind of ties into my last bullet point here, which I'm saying, don't fall for propaganda. Because today, it's the whole concept of travel has been pushed to doing something dangerous. And I don't know whether that's enjoyable. I don't think it is, because travel in war and conflict zones is being promoted. And I think that is absolutely irresponsible. I have seen blogs, I have seen people promoting tourism in conflict zones. And I think that is not tourism. I think that's absolutely irresponsible. It is definitely not something anybody should get into and try and do. Of course, being mindful of social and political situations. I've had times when I have cancelled a trip because something has developed, some political situation has developed in a particular place. So I have cancelled my trip and I've said, okay, let me postpone this and do it another time, just to be mindful of the fact that I should achieve what I intend to from that trip. It should not be something that I'm just getting into because I had planned, but it is something that I need, an objective that I need to achieve, and I should get that. And social, political upheaval will not help me do that. So that is what I advise people as well. Also, plan ahead and have a backup ready for all the situations. Also, having ensuring that you do not end up in dark and lonely streets. I think this is just common sense. And I was advised this by a family friend in the US. So, you know, it is true for all countries in the world. In my study, during my study time in the US, I had a family friend who were kind of my guardians, and they told me that do not venture out in the night, do not go on streets which are dark, and do not go out of your residence hall, even if it is to the library at after it is dark and everybody's gone back to their rooms. So that is, I think, the sensible advice. Also, the whole, using your sixth sense, being polite but firm, and keeping things formal with strangers. I think this is something that a lot of times is not given enough thought by younger people. But I think that it is important that we are formal and do not engage in conversations with people we do not know beyond a certain limit. And I have used that in my travels. I think that has been very handy because sometimes it's easy for people to get the wrong message. And so in all my travels, I think my positive experiences that I've had is because of all these thoughtful tips that I'm sharing with you. A lot of this is things that your parents will tell you. My parents have, of course, told me about all this. And using this has really ensured that I have had no instance of being in an uncomfortable situation. And I would end today's talk by saying that I wish that all the women here who are listening, and even the men, they go ahead and explore this land that we have, India. It has some amazing places to see. A lot of it can be experienced with family. There are pilgrimage spots that you can go to, and but there are places you might want to go alone and immerse yourself and understand that place. And if that is your calling, please go ahead and do it. Don't go by the reports, which are mostly just to put a negative picture to everything beautiful about our country.
I have some observations to share and then maybe a question. Is that okay?
Okay, please. Yeah.
So one of the there was a short period of time in my career when I was away from my work and I was staying in a very small place, and it so happened a lot of people, both Indian and foreigners, went through that place. I mean, people known to me. And during that time, my observation has been that I think that stereotyping which you were talking about actually causes a lot of issues, especially for people who are foreigners. That whole impression about women commodification and all of that kind of chases them even in India. So I have seen when there is a foreigner woman traveling alone versus an Indian woman traveling alone, I think the dynamics changes because of that whole perception which men have about women, of different from different backgrounds. And I think that's what I'm saying probably causes more issues for women of foreign origin who are traveling in India than Indian women. That's one. The second observation is, I think, while I think you're right about those numbers and the data which you shared, in fact, I was reading an article some time ago about, this was actually an article about sexual exploitation and molestation of women in UK as a society. And there, while most of the article was about UK and how they hide away some of the things done by a specific set of people or communities, but there in that, they had shared some data from US as well. And it was astonishing. They said hardly 9 to 12% of the cases get reported in US and rest of the cases are not reported. Which was like very, very astonishing for somebody like me to hear that. Anyway, my question is, what I observed during that time was a lot of lack of facilities especially for women in different places. Like, for example, ladies' toilets is a big problem in most of the places. Then, especially in temples and where there's a provision for people because of religious reasons or whatever to take bath or something, especially at like near rivers and all of that. There is a lack of such kind of facilities. Okay, I'm talking about 15 years ago, so I don't know, much might have changed. I don't know what your experience has been. So I would like to hear some of your thoughts around those topics.
Okay. Thank you for your question. I think you have raised a point which is something that I kind of alluded to in my talk as well. The objectification of Western women has chased them, like you said, to India because they are considered a certain way. Also, perhaps the way they interact, they come across as too friendly. But what I would like to add is that the cultural difference has now been understood. I have had people traveling, contacting me, friends who've come from abroad, both from Europe and America. In fact, there was a girl who contacted me. This was a time when there was this website where travelers would meet each other on the net. And she was just 18, 19 years old. And she came all alone to India. And she came, I was waiting for her at the metro station in Delhi. And she walked down the stairs and there were a lot of auto people starting to hassle her. And then I found her, and because she was the only white person in that entire metro station, so she could be easily spotted, and everybody wants to make a quick buck out of getting her into their auto rickshaw. The point here is that it would have happened, this kind of a heckling would happen even to a white man if he would have come down in the metro station. So it is not specific to women. I think where the problem arises because the women there have been brought up with a very different cultural experience, and that kind of cultural experience is not cannot be transported exactly in India. And so a lot of women today are trying to, women travelers from abroad are trying to understand that there is that difference and they need to be different. They have to behave differently, which is, I think, led to better experiences for a lot of those people, at least for some of those women who stayed with me. Another woman, she told me that Indian men are like children. So she was a European and a white European from Ukraine, and she had come to India. And she said, Indian men are like children. They want to stare at you because they find you so different, but they are harmless. These are her words, and this is perhaps because she has been taking care of herself, traveling in places where it's like that for anybody, right? Even for an Indian woman traveler, I think just being reasonable about what you expect from a place and the crime rates, etc. I think just makes you that much in a better situation. Now, as far as your thing about facilities, I think for every traveler, depending on what they want to experience, they do a research, and today it's really easy to do that research about what is available in that place and how comfortable it will be. If you have the means to make yourself comfortable, or you want to make yourself comfortable, you can do that even in smaller places. Take dedicated taxis, or drivers which are well known, well connected to people you know, or you can even try and visit a place and go back as a day trip in case you're not, that place is small and doesn't have facilities, which is what pretty much I have been doing. Like if I travel to a place which is really a small village like Kesargarh, I go back to Ahmedabad to spend that night so that I can take a flight the next day, or just plan my travel around that. But I would also like to point out that whole thing about people, the river, the ghats, like in Maheshwar, and this background that I have, this place is where a lot of women and men pilgrims come, and there is that ritualistic bathing in Narmada, because Narmada is a holy river also. And I did not see that the lack of facilities bothered anybody, the men or the women. I think they are just so immersed in the spirituality of the place that I do not see any. I think it's the tourists who kind of view this as a lack of facility. The real pilgrims, the real travelers to that place, they are not bothered. But having said that, yes, in Maheshwar, I saw that the government has created some bit of changing rooms, etc., for women. But most women are so used to doing their bathing and that ritual in that spiritual way, and then coming out and changing their clothes, oblivious of anything else. And I think that is something that doesn't, it's not really related to lack of facilities, but just the tradition. And a lot of older women are very comfortable with it. They do not see any issue. And I think that's really very liberal of Indian society in a lot of ways. We do not give enough credit to it. But yes, I think that even in, if you can see in Varanasi, in Prayag during Kumbh, I was there at Kumbh Mela, and I saw a lot of women bathing. And while we urban women are very coy about a lot of things about, space, personal, they are jostling, in the crowd, and doesn't really bother them. So I think that lack of facilities is a big constraint for urban travelers like us who want to be comfortable. But for a lot of pilgrims, it doesn't matter much.
So thank you very much for a very interesting talk. There are some questions that arose in my mind. First of all, what does the absolute statistics say in terms of India versus the rest of the world? Secondly, what does the statistics say within India in terms of places, whether rural or urban, whether, major metro cities or small towns, is there some kind of difference there? And thirdly, one of the things that struck me in your talk, which probably, the point is that you actually went and met people after meeting them on the internet. Do you think that was a very good idea?
Yes. Thank you so much for your question, Ramakrishnan ji. I really appreciate your concern. I'll take the last question that you asked first. When I was doing research for my book, I had only one way in today's time to lead to people. One is to get to know somebody through a contact, and the other is to do a research about people and try and find out who is the person in the context that I'm looking at to talk to. Now, there are some people who I met on the internet. I corresponded with them. I spoke to them. I also did some bit of background research about them. But I was absolutely sure when I was meeting them that there is a risk involved, and I had a backup to that. For example, the one that I talked about, Bareilly, I had a hotel booked. I knew where I needed to be. I was gauging every minute the response of this person, and I had not just left it as a guarantee that everything will turn out right. And so there was that element of understanding involved. In other cases where I've met people through the internet and gone and met them at their factory or a production unit, it's a public place. It's kind of a place where there are a lot of people. Like I met this gentleman in Maheshwar on the Ghats. There are a lot of people, and you talk about things. I have my own car, my own taxi, and then I go with him to his shop first. And the shop is again a public place. So I have that kind of a planned tour that I do when I'm at a place, when I'm especially meeting people I don't know at all. The second part of it is when I am connected to somebody through a reference, which is a strong reference, that level of comfort is higher. But also, I think what happens is that we all meet people on a daily basis. There are some times that we visit their homes. It's because we start feeling more comfortable and feel more secure with certain people and not with others. So I think on an individual level, each person has their own threshold of risk, and so maybe what I did would not be done by another lady, and that is their perception of risk and their understanding of how they need to take care of themselves. But I feel confident in certain areas of my life because of I've been traveling for 10 years. Even before this book, I wrote another book called The Indian Millionaire Next Door, where I met financial advisors across the country because I was profiling their stories, the stories of financial advisors in various different insurance and mutual fund companies. And there again, I traveled across the country. So my experience gives me a certain confidence, which given a reasonable expectation of what I have about the crime of the place or the kind of people I'm meeting, I take a call. So, I hope that answers your question. There is no real, guarantee of anything in life. So, there is an element of risk that we take every moment we go out, step out of our house. So, I would say, like I said, thoughtful travel. I think if you plan it ahead, plan in advance, keep your backups ready, I think you should be okay. So that's what now coming to the question on data. As far as the difference between urban areas, rural areas, the National Commission of Women has put together data every year. It has reports every year of different districts. A cursory look that I did, and I'm not an expert in the field of women, crime against women or women's safety. I am a traveler, so I can only share experiences. But going by the data that is there on the website, it seems to me that mostly a lot of crime is from urban areas, and also there are some. The smaller areas may, you may say are safer, or there is more lesser women who are stepping out, and that is why there is low crime. Whatever the reason is there, mostly crime is in the urban centers. Most reported crime is in the urban centers. But for the National Commission of Women, when they report incidents of women complaints against for women issues, it includes even things like harassment, workplace discrimination, and all those things. So it is not just a crime, real assault that they are counting.
Actually, I wanted to know, she has traveled a lot. What about the taxi wala, the auto wala, like that? In India, we know sometimes in late hours it is difficult, but how it is now, and how about other countries where she have traveled? and long and hired taxis like that are shared.
So,
that is one point.
Yes.
Yeah. Second thing, there are places which are exposed to travelers, and unexplored places like no less traveled places. Thank you. Share your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I have traveled across various small towns and large cities for work, which was research related. Now, I have always tried to keep my travel during the day, ensure that I do not take a auto or a taxi late at night, and this applies to all places across the world. It's not specific to India. And it is, in smaller cities, it's, in smaller towns, of course, you would not be, there is not so much of facility, like I was saying in the earlier, answering the earlier question. So what happens is that you need to plan in a little in advance and ensure that those places which you think are not really travel friendly, do not have facilities, you can do a day trip, or you can ensure that you can go there and come back at a reasonable time. As far as the risk of using autos and taxis, there is a risk. And the best thing to do it is avoid using it in hours where there is nobody on the road. So that is what I have done. In fact, there have been sometimes a situation where you have to take a taxi from one place to another later, and there are now a lot of companies which are GPS connected as far as their taxi is concerned. The drivers are verified by the police. In fact, in Bangalore, they even have women taxis. So I was planning a trip to Mysore, and I contacted the woman taxi service, and they were willing to provide a woman taxi late in the evening. So at around 8 o'clock to take me from Bangalore airport to Mysore. So that is also an option for larger towns in India. And so I think traveling in India is easier for a woman because you have so many different ways. You can go in a ladies' coach, in train. Not just now, I talked about earlier generation also. And in the Western countries, these things are not available, but you need to then plan out in your own way and ensure that you take care of these aspects of being safe.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So sorry. Hi, Kanika. First of all, it was very insightful talk because we are all deluded and by these talks of women not being safe for us, the country not being safe for women and all of that, especially in terms of solo travel and all of that. And listening to your experiences is such a relief, and it's like a side of a story that's not being told, and it's a vital perspective, and that has to be populated, and people need to speak about this. So thank you so much for talking about your experiences. And my question was again had to do with the tips that you talked about. Okay, so I wanted to understand, since I don't have a lot of travel experience, how important is it to understand the local sensibilities of space that you're visiting? Sometimes imposing your own perceptions and notions of modernity, or the lens with which you view certain places can constrict your experience there. So like you said, when you were talking about the people in the particular ghat, and how those people were immersed in spirituality, and that was their specific experience, and that is why they were there. So anybody who goes with a different lens will have a different experience inevitably. So what do you have to say about that? Does the lens with which you view something fundamentally change the experience that you receive from a place?
Thank you, Kalyani, for that question. What I understand is that you're asking what should be the purpose of travel. I think if I can go a little deeper to your question. And I think that it is a question that comes up in a lot of travelers' minds when we are traveling. In my view, when you the experience that you are seeking from a place should be directed towards also your own goals. So for me, I'm doing research on textiles, and I'm at Maheshwar. So the ghat experience is not something I'm going to experience so much. I'm going to go with the person I met at the ghat to his workshop. So my whole experience of Maheshwar is the whole Maheshwari sari production in that town. And who are the weavers, where they dye their yarn, who's giving them the yarn, what is the government doing, whether they are facing any challenges. So my whole perspective shifts. Now that depends on the traveler, what are they trying to seek. But your question about being sensitive to local sensibilities, it's not just being respectful, but I think you also need to be aware of what are the issues in that society. So if there is crime, and crime is in every country in this world, every place in this world in varying degrees, can we wish it away? No. Unfortunately, there cannot be a place in this world with zero crime rate. Like I said, even in the Nordic countries, in Finland, Sweden, Western European, North European countries with high gender equality, there are issues of women's safety. There is a lot of trafficking for women. There is a lot of abuse. Domestic abuse is very high. So, there is issue. There is issue everywhere. There are lots of problems. The thing is, how do we take care of ourselves? And to take care of ourselves, we need to know the place. We need to understand what can be done and what cannot be done. So I would think a lot of women travelers, and one gentleman had said that earlier as well, a lot of women travelers who come here from Europe try and behave exactly how they would do at home. And that is something that would not be accepted, because that is not how Indian women behave, right? We do not go around in small villages, doing partying, or, in little towns, you do not have bars or, things like that. And so that kind of alien culture cannot be transported to that place. And similarly, for a lot of us urban women, when we travel to smaller places, we need to be conscious of the fact that there would be an element of dressing, probably an element of speaking respectfully, probably an element of ensuring that you go and come back at a reasonable time and do not venture out, all by yourself in the middle of the night. So those kind of things are important to consider.
Yeah. First of all, the answer was beautifully articulated. Even I couldn't put in my doubts the same way, but thank you so much. That was very fulfilling.
Thanks.
I don't have a question. I just want to share a very funny incident which happened 2 years ago, roughly around November, December of 2019. I happened to go to California for work, and I had to come back to the airport to take my flight, and I called Uber cab, and the driver was actually a woman, and she happened to be second or third generation Indian only. So I went into the cab, and it was a long drive to the airport, and then I started chatting with her, and then I asked her a question, and it was very random. I didn't think about it. I just said, don't you feel sometimes worried about, driving in the night, passengers from here and there? And she showed me her pepper spray and said, actually, you should be worried right now. And I was like, where is it going? And I was like, no. I generally ask because, it was little, uncommon for me. So she said, yeah, I meet a lot of Indian folks who come here and all of that, this being California and all. So I think in some way, at least in some places, the dynamics is just going, in a little different way. So I just wanted to share that in the zest. I just want to make one comment about what I think the previous participant said. I personally experienced that, as I was saying, when I was staying in a small place, there was this American lady who came, and she was very young. And despite me telling her beforehand, that you're coming to a small town in India, watch out for how you dress up, how you operate, and all of that. Maybe she didn't understand or whatever. And the first day, I think lot of us had a difficult time because she was dressed in a very typical American way, and for those small town people, they have never seen anybody like that. And so sometimes I think that local sensibility kind of thing, I think helps. But sometimes I think it is so different that, it is difficult for anybody to imagine that, it could be so different. And sometimes I think that somebody may have to go and tell like all kind of minute details for somebody to even understand that. It's like, if you have not seen that thing, it's very difficult for somebody to even imagine and then act accordingly. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Namaste, Kanika ji. I'm so sorry I missed a large part of your talk, much as I was looking forward to it, but I got caught in a work-related situation. Anyway, I did catch the last bit of it, and I get the sense of what you're saying. And congratulations, first and foremost, for having done such extensive travel. It's a laudable achievement indeed. I just wanted to share my own experiences having traveled abroad in Europe alone when I was studying, and also a fair bit in India. So the thing I've noticed I was on a coach tour when I was studying in England, and we did this 7-city Europe tour. And there were a lot of Americans who were there, women as well. And I'm telling you, the stereotype that most people have about American women, and mind you, many of them were married and they had children and they left them back home. So the coach tour manager, the guide who was in charge of, he was Australian, and he was kind of smart looking and stuff, and they were hitting on him like so badly. And he was obviously in a relationship and very sincere and very attached. And he didn't like the fact that they were just not interested in seeing anything much or anything. They were just like having their fun and not following rules as well. So when we went to Rome, and there are restrictions, right, on how you're supposed to dress, which he had informed, which they didn't follow. And I still remember when we were in the queue, I was the only one who was quote unquote decently dressed. So the Italian guard actually said, "Prego, madame." Like he actually said, "Come," because he was so fed up with these, having to tell them, you can't come in like that. You can't come in with shorts and exposed arms and so on. So there's a certain lack of cooperation that's not just in India. That's everywhere they go, which is why Americans are not very popular as tourists anyway. The second point is actually it's more out of my curiosity. What you raised is actually everything I agree with when it comes to being safe while traveling, women, all those old-fashioned little things about not going out when it's dark anywhere in the world. And I'm glad you mentioned that even about the US, because it's very unsafe in many cities and many quarters. But what I've noticed nowadays is being a woman, even as a woman, when you tell people these things, there's sometimes among the so-called liberal set, there's a little bit of a pushback, like, why is it like that? Why should it be like that? Almost like it's wrong that it's like that. So if there is a cultural sort of situation that you want everyone should adapt to in a certain way, you find that there's more pushback than why are you telling me to be that way? Why can't I just be myself? So I just want to know, how is it that you navigate through that when you give these sort of suggestions? Do you face that sort of pushback from women themselves?
Yes,
I mean, not just women.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a wonderful question. I think I have also, seen that a lot of women, and it's not just the younger women, it's even older women who push back against these things. And you would be surprised, an incident comes to my mind. There's this group of Heritage Walk, organizers of Heritage Walk by Intact, which is a heritage organization in Delhi, which takes women and men on a morning tour through various heritage sites in Delhi. And one of the walks that I went to several years ago was to Nizamuddin Aulia. This is a Sufi shrine in Delhi. And this inner sanctum sanctorum is prohibited for women. And we all went in. There were some men, some women, and a lot of women there were above the age of 40. I was there with my friend, and there were some women who were even more elderly. And I was surprised to see that elderly women arguing with the caretaker of that place why they were not allowed in the inner sanctorum. And I thought that was preposterous, because you are going to a shrine, nobody has called you. You are going there, you follow the rules of the place. I think that's not the place for activism. In any case, I mean, and you raised this thing about Rome, and I'm very glad that you did it, because somehow this whole mindset of rules and regulations kind of gets pinned on India and the whole Hindu culture of India, which is not true. Rules and regulations apply for men and women in shrines and places of significance across the world. I'm sure if you're going to meet the President of India, you would be told to adhere to a certain decorum. And if you go into a temple in South India, especially, I know about this temple in Tiruvananthapuram, where men are supposed to dress up traditionally as well. And women are supposed to dress up traditionally too when they enter that shrine. So it's not as if, it is some kind of imbalance that is being pushed or forced. It happens in all places of significance across the world. I'm sure if you go to meet the President of the United States, you will be asked to come dressed in a certain way. I don't think you'll be allowed to walk in barefoot. I don't think you'll be allowed to come in, without clothes, So I think there is an element of decorum that all places expect. And so I think it's only fair that we follow it as travelers. I don't think it's, there is any reason to rebel when you're going and visiting a place because they have not invited you. I think it's a privilege that we have today to go and travel to places because of easy connectivity. And I think we need to be respectful of each culture, each place and their rules, and more so of our own country.
While all your talking was happening, I looked up the Forbes report that you referred to.
Yeah.
And it is about, India is, the report says, apparently the summary of the report says that it is one of the most complex with wide variations across regions. But the most important point is that the country continues to experience terrorist activities that may impact US citizens, according to the State Departments. Okay. And so, they have brought in the element of terrorism also. It is not just about whether an urban area is safe or unsafe in terms of crime rates. So, this report also brings into view the angle of terrorism, which is actually relevant when you think back to 2008 when the Taj was attacked and there were foreigners in that hotel, right? And I think that part of the flack that India has received is because of this susceptibility to terrorism and, terrorism against, Westerners.
I think what you are saying, pointing out, is also to something that is a very widespread angle that Western media uses for anything that happens in India. So, if they are building the terrorism angle, I'm not surprised. We saw it in the COVID reporting recently. So everything, in terms of disaster that happens in India is pushed up as a big, catastrophe, while the same things happening across the world are not even mentioned. So we've had the same thing happen with news reports on, COVID and all those things. So I think that it's not surprising. This report is actually, thank you for bringing it up. It's totally inaccurate as far as traveling is concerned and women's safety is concerned.